Hey, hello. Wow, it's hot today. It's really hot. I've done you a favor, and just before coming on stage, I changed out of my shorts into trousers because I'm pretty sure you didn't want to see my pasty English legs. So that's what I do for you people. That's how much it means to me. Now, hopefully this is gonna work. I do have a tendency to wander, and then I lose the connection. So let's just see how it goes. Anyway, wow. My name's Elliot. I am a designer. I'm a writer, I'm a musician, although some proper musicians would probably just call me a producer. But most importantly, I am excited to be back, seeing some real faces in the real world. And I know you've heard this all day, and I'm gonna kind of just lean in Brad style, contemplative, just yeah. But it's amazing to be back. It is so exciting to be doing real events again, and it's wonderful that this is a hybrid event, so hello to everybody at home as well. I am going to take you through it's a bit of a horribly self-indulgent talk, but it's a kind of a look back on my projects that I've kind of got involved with over the years, and I'm going to show you some mistakes that I've made so that you don't have to make them. Or maybe do make them. Maybe that's the message, is just kind of making mistakes, letting mistakes happen. The talk is in 3 parts. I was trying to come up with some witty names for each part, but I couldn't think of any, so it's just called a beginning, middle, and end. Now, you'll notice that this is set in a black letter typeface. Very, very good reason for this. It's because I just bought the font the other day. And, you know, that's fine. You gotta have your font choices dictated by something, so let it be that. Anyway, hello again, proper hello now. This is an interview with me from a few years ago in a German magazine called Page. You don't need to understand what it says, except that just have a look at that word, typomaniac. I was described as a typomaniac, which is a great, great honor, because as far as I know, up until that point, I think purely you can only, you have to reserve that word for describing Erich Spiekermann. So a real great honor to be called a typomaniac. My poor, long-suffering wife, putting up with me pointing out bad kerning on cereal boxes like that. What a loser. Anyway, I live here in the countryside just south of Bristol, in that funny little kingdom of ours. It's nice. It's just outside the city, but it's like you wouldn't know the city's there. It's pretty green, rolling hills. It's pretty much like Harry Potter. So yeah, whatever image you have in your mind of a little English postcard village, let's go with that. We are very, very fortunate enough to have a little studio in our garden, which sort of doubles as a music recording studio and an office space for me. And in this photo, you can see kind of quite a few things that sum up my creative output, as it were. So there's a few issues of Lagom at the top and a few issues of 8 Faces. They're 2 magazines that I co-founded that I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Where the iMac is, you can see there's the sort of where the work stuff happening. And then there's my sort of collection of synths over there. So even though the office is relatively tidy and organized, and there's some typography books and all kind of designy things, my colleagues and clients, when they're on the webcam, they only just see all of the music stuff behind me. But it is a good talking point, at least. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of magazines that I founded or co-founded. They're not my only side projects, but they're definitely the biggest ones in terms of kind of the amount of work. And they're both also responsible, especially 8 Faces, for me becoming immersed into the world of type and typography. So let me take you back to 2010. I was a bit of a type noob. I was a web designer at the time. I had just started kind of getting into typography. Web fonts were becoming a thing. They were becoming better supported in browsers. And web design kind of felt like it was growing up a bit, like we could start to take a load of learnings from print and apply them to the web. So I decided that a great way to do that, despite having almost no print experience, would be to create a printed magazine about type. And this was also, and there's just looking, there's a few old folks in the audience, so you might just about remember. This is like when iPad magazines were a thing, like when there was that Wired one. Remember that? And everyone got very excited about that, even though it was just basically like just a bunch of JPEGs just kind of thrown into an app. But there's loads of hype around that kind of thing at the time. So creating a printed real-world magazine definitely felt like a bad idea at the time. But it kind of worked. I asked a bunch of designers who I admired if they would like to be interviewed by me to go into this magazine, and much to my surprise, they all said yes. One of them being Eric. So I went to go and meet Eric for lunch in London, and it was very daunting. I was a real fanboy, and I tweeted on the way there, and I said, going to meet Eric Spiegman for lunch for an interview or something. And Mark Bolton tweeted back saying, like, that would be like having a lunch with God. And oh my goodness, yeah, I was so nervous. But for any of you who know Eric, he's a very funny, lovely guy, and soon put me at ease. So I interviewed him, and I interviewed all the other designers, and I put together this first issue despite not really knowing what I was doing, and much to my surprise, because it was sort of just done as a kind of selfish project really, it sold out. I think it was in the first hour or a couple of hours, and then I then proceeded to make 8 more issues. So the idea was always just to make 8 from the very beginning, and they looked like this. The general premise of 8 Faces was that we would interview 8 designers and ask them their 8 favorite typefaces, and then set some nice specimen spreads with them. And we would interview them about their life and their work, and there'd be some tips in there, and it was just kind of a super geeky magazine. And actually, I didn't really realize at the time, but just having quite a small but very, very focused niche audience was a really great way of getting like partnerships, so getting like advertising from type foundries and whatnot. When the magazine came to an end, or a couple of years later, I wanted to revisit it and edit it all again and redesign it and get some stuff from our website. And so I ran this Kickstarter campaign to create this big hardcover collected edition of the magazines. And this is kind of a thing, I suppose, that goes through a lot of my work, and it probably comes from being a web designer, where I was so used to being able to change things and everything being in flux the whole time, that I keep revisiting my work, even with print design, which perhaps isn't a very good idea. But there we go. So as I was making 8 Faces, I was a designer at the time, as I said, a web designer, so I had a little bit of print experience. I'd done a little bit of illustration. I dabbled with some photography, but I certainly didn't know about editing a magazine or doing any of the kind of logistical stuff. Just had to kind of learn by doing. And much to my surprise, some of those other roles, the sort of non-creative roles, looking after partnerships and working with contributors, they actually turned out to be some of the most fun bits of the work in a way. Now, I have a terrible attention span. Like Vitaly said, I jump around, do quite a few different things. I like to wear a lot of different hats, do a lot of different roles. I get pretty bored just doing one thing. And actually, it was this kind of non-sexy logistical stuff that made the whole process really, really exciting. And it led to me co-founding with my wife the lifestyle magazine Logom. So we started this. My wife is a writer and editor. We wanted to do something together. We wanted to reach out to a wider audience. And so we started this after 8 Faces finished. This is what the magazine looked like. We ran it for 10 issues. We invested a lot of time and effort and money into some really, really nice production values. So it had like a matte laminate cover and some silver or gold foil blocking, and it was all perfect bound and, a really nice chunky thing. You'll see in this there are a lot of photos of big chunky spines. Ooh, what a lovely spine that is there. There's going to be quite a few of them. So it looked like this. And after doing 5 issues, so here's the 6th issue, I kind of changed the design system because, again, I'd kind of got bored with the way it looks, so I decided to kind of rip up the rule book and start it all again. But it looked like this inside, and we focused on people who achieved a healthy work-life balance and were doing a lot of interesting things. Cool, creative folks, a lot of travel, and we met some really lovely people, and it was a really, really wonderful experience. We worked with so many talented photographers and writers and illustrators. Brad, where are you? You're in the audience? Skiving. Well, there we go. He might recognize that lady, because that's Brad's wife, Melissa, who's a very talented jewelry maker. And we got free stuff as well. That's the other good thing about running a magazine. You get free stuff. So I had this watch. That was quite nice. That kind of broke eventually. But I've still got that coffee mug, so I still have my coffee from that every day. Anyway, as I said, we met a lot of really interesting people and had some great experiences making the magazine. So it wasn't just about the end result, but the whole process, the whole journey, as it were, is what made it so much fun to do, especially looking back in retrospect. We stopped it at the end of 2019. We just kind of fallen out of love with it in the end. And that was probably a good decision, because for such a travel-focused magazine, I'm not sure it would have survived the incoming pandemic at that point. We did some stuff with some unexpected things came out of it, like selling the translation rights. So we sold the translation rights to a couple of publishers, a Chinese one and a South Korean one. And the South Korean publisher did a really lovely job. They really went to town with the production values. They took the design system and kind of really made it their own. And that was really, really lovely to get those Korean editions shipped to us. Speaking of Korean, anyone know who this guy is? His name is King Sejong, and he was a king in what is now Korea in, I think, the 14th century. And he was a really cool king, because basically he realized that all the power was held by the upper classes, and he wanted the lower classes, who were mainly illiterate, to be able to read and write and to be involved in policy process. And so he did an amazing thing, and I only found out about this recently from one of my colleagues at Google Fonts, where he basically invented a whole writing system, which is called Hangul, and is the writing system for the Korean language. And the crazy thing about this very rarely happens. You hardly ever get a script that is just invented from scratch. But Hangul is really special in that the actual shapes of the letter forms actually give hints at the pronunciation of the sounds, the words and the sounds in there. So they have hints about the shape of your mouth and where you should place your tongue when making certain sounds, when forming certain words. Really, really cool. Anyway, right, we're up to the middle. Time's looking okay, all good. Okay, so let me just take you back a bit through a couple of decades of so-called work. As I said, I was a web designer. I kind of think of myself now as a recovering web designer. So back in the day, I was one of those people who I was responsible for quite a few Flash websites. I'm sorry about that. And it was interesting watching Miriam showed the slide of taking, print design and going, how can we do this on the web? And, back then, people we went, hey, let's just take those constraints in print design, those absolute dimensions, and just try and remake it on the web. So this was one of the first sites I designed when I was at EMI Music. So I graduated from uni. I did a load of Flash sites for friends' bands on the side, and so I ended up with this kind of music-centric portfolio. And it got me a job as a junior web designer at EMI Music when they still existed as a separate major label. And this was one of the first sites for Joss Stone, and it was like pixel fonts and those scrollers with like inertia, remember all that? And auto-playing music, really, really painful, especially when you're testing this stuff. But that was, I had a lot of fun EMI doing sites for different artists and bands. Working with Massive Attack, who one of my favorite bands, was a real highlight of my time there. That was really fun. And then after EMI, I went to go and work for a label called Sanctuary Records. And they were kind of on their way out. They didn't survive for very long. And as a result, there wasn't really much work to do. So I actually got to spend most of my work time just kind of teaching myself HTML and CSS. and starting to blog a bit about the process and making the personal, my first version of my personal website. And then I was putting it on CSS galleries and stuff like that. And this is the version here that I was trying to kind of get the word out about my work and whatnot. And then after that, I got approached by Ryan Carson and worked for him for 6 months. And designing, the future web app sites, all that kind of stuff. Look, Matt Mullenweg looking really young. Oh, Gary Vaynerchuk before NFTs. I went freelance after that, and I wrote a book with a very silly title, but it wasn't my fault. The publisher already had this title. It was decided before I was attached to the project, but I had to live with it. But hey, at least the German version has a really cool cover. What says sexy web design more than a toy car and a toy frog? Anyway, so yeah, I went freelance, and I started dabbling in the world of web fonts, using Museo before it became horribly overused. And I also, around this time, started doing some branding as well as actual websites. So I did the branding for the first Brooklyn Beta conference, and we actually used a beta version of this typeface, Quattro Slab, by the type designer Mark Caniso. And I got in touch with him and said, we're working on this thing, this whole kind of, beta branding, and, could we use this version of the typeface that you're working on? So he sent us the font files, and it was great. We got to test this out. It was all very relevant, all very meta. And then when he eventually finished the font and put it on sale, he used all the kind of Brooklyn-centric stuff in his marketing page. This is a screen grab from the site as it is. So there was this quite nice cyclical process involving the type designer in the actual design of this thing, and then it all became this wonderful little feedback loop. I was doing a bit of branding for the Ampersand conference, as well as their website, and a few other projects. I took a break from client work to focus on 8 Faces and this other company I'll show you in a sec called Viewport Industries. But the last project I did before I took a break from client work was redesigning Smashing magazine. Vitaly, what does that say about you as a client, that forced me to take a break? Only joking. I was doing little bits of illustration on the side. Andy Clark had a book out, and I did the interior illustrations for that. I kind of always wanted to be a comic book illustrator as a kid, so that was kind of fun to do every now and again. And I did little bits of print design, but it was like Friends CD covers and stuff. This is prior to the magazines. Again, didn't really know too much about that. But at some point, where was it, 2011, I decided to take a break from client work, form another company with my friend Kia, and it was kind of an experimental year where we just made a bunch of stuff. So we did this one-issue newspaper called Digest. We did an iOS app called Countdown. Oh man, you know what? I really regret this. Oh, whoa, we're going ahead. Easy, hang on, sorry. So Countdown was like this timer, this like Pomodoro timer, and I didn't use the tabular numerals for this. So as the timer would count down and the widths of the glyphs would change, the time would jump all around all over the place. So lots of mistakes of not really knowing what I was doing there. And we ran some events, and that was fun. And we also put out a book. This is a book called Insights, a big 256-page thing with a sort of hardback sort of case thing that wrapped around it. And foiling and all that fun stuff again. And then while I was doing that, I got asked by Jeff Veen at Typekit whether I would like to come on board and take over from Jason Santamaria, who had just left as their creative director. So Typekit had just been acquired by Adobe at the time, and Jason was like one of my all-time favorite web designers. So it was a great honor to go and do that. Really humbled to be asked. And so I joined Typekit as creative director and kind of helped lead them on that path to what would eventually become known as Adobe fonts, integrating with all the Creative Cloud apps and whatnot. And when I left Typekit, I decided to focus on Logom and a little bit of freelance kind of creative direction. So I did some work as sort of part-time creative director for this company called Colonna Coffee in Bath. It's run by UK barista champion Maxwell Colonna Dashwood. And started doing little bits of other stuff. This is a logo for Maxwell, actually. And oh my goodness, this is for, I don't think it's ever launched. This was for a podcast that he was doing. And you wouldn't believe like the tweaking of the spacing to make this appear optically center aligned, but also form like a cup and a V60. Yeah, but lots of fun with type geekery. I got involved with doing some the branding and all of the artwork for two friends of mine who run a techno label in Berlin called Unterwegs, and I'm still doing that today. I just finished off the vinyl label for the new release that's coming out soon, and while we were still doing Logom, Sam and I worked with our friend Alex Hunter, who runs a YouTube channel called The Attaché Guide to Travel. And we put out this kind of co-branded book, so it kind of reused Logom's design system. Again, big chunky spines, you know the drill. And it kind of looked like this. And yeah, just lots of fun putting real-world objects out there. Again, probably as an antidote to the fact that I'd kind of focused so much on the web. But for whatever reason, we were doing the magazine, I'd done bits of client work, and then I sort of found myself, I don't know if necessarily burnt out is the right phrase, but I think it was, towards the end of 2018, and I just kind of wasn't necessarily sure that I still wanted to be doing design. And I was we had a partner at Logom magazine. There was an advertiser who was starting a new company, and he said, "Do you want to come on board this new company and kind of in an editorial director role to kind of help take what I'd learned from Logom magazine and from Eight Faces and do it for this new startup?" And I thought, yeah, that could be really interesting. I'll do that. And maybe this is the healthy change I need, as I've kind of got a bit sick of some design stuff. So this startup opened a store in Plano in Texas. And I was interviewing a bunch of people, the makers behind this stuff. I interviewed Serena Williams, which was quite bizarre. And here's the launch of the store on the opening day. And I talk a lot about like happy accidents and letting mistakes happen. Unfortunately, this was not. This was just a mistake, actually. It turns out that I got really freaked out at not being able to call myself a designer, and just kind of doing editorial stuff for a shop really wasn't me. So I was complaining to my friend Frank, who runs the design team at ClearScore, which is a UK-based fintech firm, and I was already doing a little bit of work with them, like consulting on helping them get a bespoke typeface designed. So they had a typeface design called Clear Sans, designed by Dino dos Santos, or DS Type in Portugal. And I was kind of helping them out with that. And I joined them as sort of creative director role, not on the actual product, but like on some events and stuff like that. And then there was a company that I'd run a typography workshop there a few years ago, and their creative director was going on maternity leave. And my contact there said, "Oh, do you want to come on board and do this?" So I led the design team at this agency in London called Mido. And I was pretty hands-off. I didn't really get involved in any sort of at-the-coalface design, apart from when we did some light rebranding for the company, and I got to kind of geek out over some type tweaks there. But that was all going very well, and I was enjoying leading the design team. But then, of course, 2020 happened, and they were really hard hit. Their main client was a gym. Turned out that didn't work out so well in COVID. So I had to leave there. And then I was kind of freaking out, because I was like, what do? Do I go back to doing client work, which I kind of had to do just to kind of bring some money in? And I just wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I was kind of freaking out a little bit. And I wanted to just retreat to a cabin in the woods and write a book. That was kind of where my head was at. And then I thought, well, maybe I could write a book. Maybe I could gather all this information from this typography workshop I've been teaching and then put that into a book. And I pitched that idea to a friend of mine who worked at Google. And eventually, so we started talking, and the book turned into a website, and then the website turned into part of Google Fonts, which is now called Google Fonts Knowledge. But I'm going to take you over to that in a sec. Side projects. So just quickly, just to go back in, I've talked about some big ones, but I've also always liked to dabble in like small ones. I made this WordPress theme years ago, which basically just stripped out all the design from the basic WordPress theme. And people used to email in saying, your demo site's broken, there's no CSS loading. And it's like, that was the point. Recently, I made these little cards just for myself, again, scratching my own itch, inspired by those analog cards that Jeff Sheldon created recently under his Ugmug brand. I really liked them, but I felt they're a little bit overkill for what I personally wanted to do in the way that I kind of work. So I just made these very basic, simple ones, and they've really, really helped with productivity. They're just some couple of InDesign files. They're on GitHub for free if you want to grab them. They're just for little moo cards if you want to get them printed. Pretty standard. So I've highlighted here all of the projects I had and have had that are the kind of you could be considered side projects. And obviously they kind of like blur the line of what is a side project? What is your kind of full-time day job? But all along the side of this, I've not so much recently, but blogged about the process and tried to share what I've learned about these, working in different mediums. And I started writing for some magazines and dipping my toe into some public speaking. And then eventually that turned into more speaking and workshops and stuff like that. And then music has been this thing that's been all throughout my life. I've been making music, but I suppose around sort of 2016, 2017, I started to get a bit more serious with it. Discovered some cool hardware stuff with knobs and buttons and faders, and that made me start getting into electronic music. And then I got more serious about that actually in 2020 when I started putting out other people's music on my label. So let me talk to you a little bit about this. Here is my in need of an update website for it's otherform.uk. Otherform is my kind of music alias. And when I wanted to put together a quick website, and they had a licensing thing where Nitty Grotesque was one of the fonts that you could choose on their font picker. And I thought, yeah, that's great. And so I used that technical constraint to dictate the typeface that I was going to use for all of the label and all of my music stuff. So in 2017, I put out an EP on vinyl, and I learned all about the process of creating a vinyl record. I got it mastered. I attended the mastering session, and to actually watch your music being cut by a lathe into a piece of lacquer, it's like the most analog thing ever. Oh, have we got any sound here, guys? Thank you. Physically, the music actually makes those indentations. It dictates the way that this moves. It's like the opposite of a record being played, and it's just so tangible. And again, pretty much the antithesis of web design. But then it was nice seeing the record show up in like online stores and real stores. And then since then, I've kind of been working on a bunch of music and sort of putting some stuff out fairly steadily. This is the label's Bandcamp. And releasing music by other people has allowed me to explore all these other design opportunities that perhaps I wouldn't get to explore in my day job. So this is a cassette that we put out, and this kind of just red plastic, and so like the red text within here kind of disappears when you put it in there. And the cover for that, let me go back here. So the cover, I used this website called components.ai to generate this Voronoi pattern for the front. And then this guy who runs the site, Adam Morse, he got in contact, and we kind of knew each other loosely through Twitter over the years. But he sent me this generative pen plotter piece of art one Christmas, which was just, sorry, it wasn't Christmas, it was in the middle of summer actually. But he sent it to me, and I loved it, and I framed it, and I put it in the office. And I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool for the next compilation we put out if I scan that and then use that one for the artwork? So again, this kind of feedback loop between myself and sort of external creators has led to a lot of fun there. A turning point in music came for me in 2021. I was just putting stuff out and, releasing music at the best of times, but especially digitally, and especially now, can sometimes feel like sort of just shouting into the ether. But then I found out that Charlotte de Witte and Enrico Sanguilioni, they opened this big live stream that they were doing from this rooftop in Ghent with one of my tracks, which I'll play you a little clip here. Anyway, I won't play you the whole thing, but it's a really bizarre feeling to be sitting in my little kind of garden shed in rural Somerset in England and to be seeing these kind of superstar DJs playing this thing. So it's nice. It wasn't just like my mum listening to my records anymore. So talk about the work-life balance a lot. We kind of made a whole magazine about it. This was kind of Lagom's, raison d'etre. And part of that is, having a decent work-life balance. Then I feel like, hopefully, just about managed to achieve it. So here's me with my kids, who I'm missing very much. A little insight into our evening routine there. As I mentioned, we have this garden in the studio. Very lucky that I get to work from home and work remotely and spend a lot of time, with my family and be around to kind of make coffee or undo the kids' paint jars and stuff like that. I'm going to skip through some of this. But we've really intentionally designed a life where work and kind of projects can be pursued in such a way that means our kids can be involved, and it can be really, really, really fun, have a lot of quality time together. When we were doing the magazine, we went to Paris and did this photo shoot with Kate Staples from This Is the Kit. Brought along our then 2-year-old daughter, Thea. Here she is in this picture here. And she was just, she barely remembers this now, sadly. But just being able to involve her in the process of this thing that we were creating has been really, really rewarding. The timer is scaring me over there, so I'm going to go into it. I'm going to skip through these slides super quickly because the important bit is what matters. So let's just get over to here, blah, blah, blah. Right, okay, so it might come as no surprise that this kind of notion of my idea of being successful has very little to do with money and is much more about enjoyment of your life and your work. So just to prove that point in a kind of literal way, I'm going to share some figures with you from Lagom. And so once it finished, I worked out exactly how much money we'd made. So the total sales of the magazine of over 10 issues, so over 5 years, came to £207,000, which is a nice amount of money, of course. But our expenses, so the costs of our contributors, photographers, writers, proofreaders, printers, shipping, blah, 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 came to £192,000, which is also a lot of money. Which meant that their profit was the grand total of about £14,500. Now, that's certainly not bad, especially for something that we're doing for fun. But when you divide it across 10 issues and the fact that there were 2 of us working on it, it's the equivalent of £123 a month salary, which is certainly not going to impress anyone, especially any kind of Silicon Valley investor types. So that is not, oh, hello. Did someone throw something at me? What is it? It's a sign. I don't know what sign it is, but we'll leave it there. So, as I said, by the end of 2020, I had come to this point where I'd kind of done a bunch of different projects, and I didn't really want to go back to client work, and I wanted to share a lot of this typographic knowledge that I've been working on in workshops and sharing over the years through the magazines and whatnot. So I approached Google, and we eventually came up with this thing that would become Google Fonts Knowledge. Every day when I leave my village, as I drive past, I have to drive past this pub. Every day I have to look at that swash A right in the middle of the word. Who are these people? So I want to share my typographic pedantry to try and avoid these situations. I'm going to show you a few illustrations now from Google Fonts Knowledge that were created when we launched. Let's first think about the humble italic. We kind of take it for granted. But here's the same sentence with a different word italicized, and it has the power to change the meaning of the sentence quite radically. So let's just go through these. I didn't say we should kill him. 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 This stuff matters. My poor German friends who have to put up with this stuff, typefaces, or fonts rather, that don't contain any glyphs for non-English characters. And also I love the intersection of typography and copywriting, and I'm a bit of a pedant when it comes to getting people to use apostrophes correctly, or to use curly or typographer's quotes. All of this aids in meaning. I see a lot of this, a lot of the time. Faux italics, they're everywhere. So easy way to spot a faux italic, well, this is a huge generalization, but often if you have a double story A and double story G, when they're italicized, they usually move to kind of single story. But when it's a faux italic, so when the browser or maybe even just your desktop software renders it artificially, you get what's there in the middle. Slightly harder to spot faux bolds, but essentially there's a stroke being added around the letter forms, and the spacing closes up, so it looks kind of really busy. I talked a little bit about in the Countdown app earlier on, using the correct numerals. So whether there are usually 4 different flavors of numerals, so you can have proportional ones that look a little bit like lowercase text, lining ones which look more like uppercase, and then making sure you have tabular ones used if you're actually showing like tabular data so that they line up. The little known, sadly often used, grade is super powerful, especially if you're working in print. Now, this is an approximation. It doesn't really work on screen, which is why I kind of added in these arrows. But when you have a load of color and the white part on the paper is obviously the bit that doesn't contain the ink kind of bleeds and fills in that space. So when you suddenly switch, say, from having a dark type on a light background to light type on a dark background, if you use a different grade, you can very subtly prepare for the fact that that ink is going to take away some of your letter forms. I see this a lot where headings are divorced from paragraphs and they are spaced in such a way that they almost look like their own element that's kind of not related to any part of the content. I see more and more use of optical sizes these days, which makes me very happy, so that the correct size of the type is being used. So you're getting more contrast, tighter spacing for like sort of display sizes or heading sizes, and the body sizes, the spacing's a bit more generous. The contrast is a little bit lower. There's sort of more monolinear forms. Some of the stuff that we've got on there as well, it tries to explain this concept of people going, I changed the font, and now this one looks like it's kind of smaller than the other one, my previous one. And people, it can be hard to understand exactly why that is, but when you've got X height and the depth of descenders and the height of ascenders, and where these characters sit in this M square, you have you can change typefaces and have things look really radically different, and things optically appear to be different sizes. So we've got some load of content on there that explains that. I see this a lot, especially on the web, especially when the web kind of became responsive, these really unwieldy measures or line lengths. It's always useful to turn off your ligatures if you are generously spacing your text. So, because otherwise, like the example in the middle, you're going to have the apparent clumping of the FF ligature there, while everything else has got lots of space. Breaking the rules, so things like nudging, hanging punctuation just outside the text box so that things appear optically aligned. And a few things I learned, especially from Eric, who was very generous with his time and served as the resident typomaniac of both magazines, and saying things like, well, you know what, if you've got some punctuation, like the comma there, to move the footnote reference to outside the comma, or to actually make sure that you've got the punctuation and the space after it italicized as well, so that all of the spacing is correct for the whole text. Some incremental leading lessons in there as well. And yeah, please do go and have a look. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. A lot of it is surprisingly about breaking the rules. This is the thing with typography, is making it look right is not necessarily exactly what the metrics say. It is about, you know, kind of just eyeballing it sometimes. For those of you who've kind of got into the joys of variable fonts, we've been pushing really hard on this subject recently. So here's you know, an example here showing how you can change some of the forms here in the Francis typeface to go from what is quite crisp and high contrast and sharp into something much softer, much more rounded. And then if you really want to jump down the rabbit hole, then wow, you should really get into parametric axes. This is, yeah, did I hear a little, I heard like a minor whoop then. Oh yeah, okay. So this is like variable fonts on acid, where you take the tiny parts of what makes something change along a variable axis and only change one small part of it for kind of the real ultimate way to finesse your type. We, as Latin type users, have it so easy. I was researching some shaping. Shaping is something that is very, it happens when we type on the computer and text is rendered. But in index scripts, for instance, there is so much that has to happen for those glyphs to get rendered correctly, for the meaning to be expressed in the correct way. We really don't know we've got it made with Latin script. So there's a bunch of stuff, a few quick blasts from Google Fonts Knowledge in a few seconds. But do go and have a look at the site. It's on fonts.google.com/knowledge. We are adding more content all of the time. We have all of our content reviewed by a bunch of different typographic experts over the world, and we're really pushing into a load of kind of non-Latin stuff as well. So I would love to hear from any of you who have any suggestions for some things that you would love to see published on the site. What would be useful for everyone to know that we don't have currently covered on there? And you know, one day you're a type noob getting super scared about going to meet Eric Spiekermann, and then suddenly you're on a boat with Eric and his wife in the Tiburon. This was a photo I took a few years after meeting Eric, and you know, he's become a good friend and you know, been super generous with his time and made me a typomaniac. So to conclude, sorry that I'm running over a little bit. Passion. That is a word that is thrown around a lot, especially at tech conferences. And it's all very well saying, you know, follow your passions. Now, if you love drawing, you could become an illustrator. That's great. That's a very logical interpretation of that. But hang on, I think there's more to it. There are more nuances. So, for instance, when I started this on the magazines, I knew that the writing bit would be fun, that the designing bit would be fun. I didn't really realize that the whole creative process, all the kind of not particularly sexy logistical stuff, would actually kind of be some of the fun stuff. And a lot of that also ended up being what I would later be paid to do as a consultant. So successful side projects will lead to paid work. I believe that it's important not to pursue money as the goal, but to accept that money will come as a natural byproduct of doing what you love. It's also really important to describe yourself and the work that you do in a way that will kind of lead to more of that work. So I remember a few years ago, Dan Rubin talked about how he wanted to do more photography work, and instead of having his Twitter bio saying designer/photographer, he's changed it to be photographer/designer. And just that emphasis kind of made a switch in people's minds. So do the kind of work that you want to do and update your bio. Successful projects enable a lifestyle, and it's super important to not think about making a project so that one day you're going to get rich from it and you're going to have such a great lifestyle once you're rich. Because that's not it. It should be about the lifestyle that is enabled by doing the actual thing. So the actual creative process that goes into making something. As I said, creating Lagom enabled us to a certain lifestyle. And now with Google Fonts Knowledge, I'm super lucky that I get to work in such a way that I can work from home and spend a bunch of time with my family and kind of balance a few different things that have come from writing about design and actual design, and just I get paid to geek out about fonts all day, which I'm very, very grateful for. Figures in a bank account don't convey how much fulfillment you get from a project. I think you should judge success by how much you actually enjoy something. Super, super important. I say don't worry too much about the plan. Just think about how happy you are. Be selfish. That's okay. And lastly, don't be afraid to quit. So when the passion dies, it's okay to stop. We kind of taught, especially in the tech industry, keep pushing, keep hustling, keep going on. But actually, to be honest, I know a load of people who've just, flogging a dead horse. They're trying still. They believe in this project they created, and they're just doing it because by default they feel that they have to, that they don't want to be perceived as failures. But it's okay to stop. We stopped the magazine when we just got sick of people asking us to advertise their products for free, basically. That neighborhood goods job that I took was a nice break at the time, but was a mistake. I realized that I shouldn't not be a designer. And so I stopped that as soon as I could. Excuse me. There's a quote that I use a lot. It's from the first issue of Eight Faces by my friend Ian Coyle, but I still love it. Typically, we judge success on impression-based metrics, but I look more towards expression-based metrics. How much do people actually care about it? So Google Fonts Knowledge gets a load of impressions, a scary amount of impressions. Oh, my goodness. But that certainly has nothing to do with my enjoyment. My enjoyment comes from how I value the worth of that content in the public's eyes. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I found this the other day. It's by an artist called Brendan Dawes. Some of you may be familiar with. It's this kind of manifesto that he's written down for himself and made some prints of. It's really, really beautiful. So check that out at his website. But hang on, I can't just end with a quote or end with a picture of a poster. So I'm going to end with a question. Who wants to grab a drink and drunkenly discuss fonts? I will see you at the after party. Thank you. And because I know you're going to ask, of course you're going to ask, there are the fonts that I used in my presentation. And just some links as well for you. There's my very easy to find online. ELLIOT J Stocks is my handle everywhere. Other form is my music stuff. If anyone wants to go to Labels Bandcamp, I've got a discount code there. It's Smashing, pretty easy to remember. That will give you 90% off everything. Again, I prefer to get stuff out there rather than try and make money from it. And you can't really make money with music anyway. So, cool. San Francisco, thank you very, very much again. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, ELLIOT. Excellent. I think Please let me know on the countdown just how much time we have for questions. It says 1 minute. I can barely ask a question in 1 minute. Oh, it goes up. 5.
Oh, hey. Amazing.
All right, here we go. So it's interesting that you're saying that. I actually really like the quote that the last one, I think, almost last one.
Ian's one?
Successful side projects will lead to paid work. It was definitely the case for me as well. So here's a question that relates to that from the chat. Oh, wonderful people posting in the collaborative Google Doc and the chat.
Thank you.
So what advice would you give to someone looking to explore creative side projects? Like just dedicate time, or does it need to be, what scope would you take to make it work? Like any kind of advice there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's, perhaps this is a simple answer, but I think it's super important to just do it, to do that work, to find time, whether that is staying up late at night or perhaps doing a little bit of evening work. This is, I know this kind of flies in the face of like that work-life balance thing. Like, well, hang on, if I'm working in the evenings and weekends, that doesn't sound like a very strong work-life balance. But I think if it is something that you really care about it, one, that it kind of then isn't really work, you just would do it for fun anyway. And I think through doing that and pursuing what you really do believe in, what resonates with you creatively, you will end up doing more and more of that work. And perhaps if you're trying to do it as a kind of a shift away from, a dead-end day job, eventually that kind of shift will happen. But I know, I must admit, I'm terrible at switching off. So I'm not very good at relaxing. So I won't spend too much time on Netflix because I would kind of feel like, oh, I should be making a song or something. So I need to get better at actually just giving myself some time off. But definitely from other folks that I've spoken to as well, those who do a load of side projects, I mean, folks, you look at like Jessica Hirsch or someone who's like, always churning out these really interesting side projects. It's because we're doing stuff where you're not, instead of playing video games for hours or binging on Netflix for hours, it's kind of using that time productively to try and be creative. But I will say as well to also just not worry about the plan too much, to not think about like, how is this going to literally translate to something? Just do it, and all of that will come in time.
Right, we're talking about songs. There are many questions about music here. Oh, so one of them is Ableton or Logic?
Ableton. All the way. All the way. I've actually never used Logic at all, so I've been Ableton for years.
All right. And most fun part of working with Massive Attack?
I'm not sure if it was necessarily the most fun part, but it's most memorable. So this was when they launched their best of album, Collective, and they had this big launch party, and I got to go along to it, and I was so excited. And they also had free Leffe on tap, and I just got very, very drunk and spent the whole evening talking to 3D about my music, which was pretty terrible at the time. And I got...
Were they impressed?
He acted very politely, but I think he didn't appreciate me hounding him for about 3 hours all night. But it did keep him away from some music industry people, so maybe...
Right.
Maybe it worked out. Okay.
So do you have any ambition to, I don't know, like now that Charlotte David is opening with your music, do you have an ambition to just go to Berghain in Berlin and take it over?
I mean, I would love to play Berghain one day. A couple of my tracks have been played at Berghain, which is nice. But you're not allowed cameras in there.
Yeah, because, I tried to get in 3 times and I never got in. So
you've got to... Yeah, I don't know. There's no.
Maybe if you playing there, maybe I don't know. Maybe
I'll put you on the guest list.
Yeah. Okay, maybe one more question that came up as well, but also quick answer because we have just 1 minute. Since you've worked across various medium, print, apps, products, web, are there things you love about designing for some more than for others?
Yeah, definitely. So I think because I did so much web design, getting into print was kind of the antidote to that. So I got very tired of everything, having to keep up with browser updates and the changing. So this is going back a little bit further, but the uncertainty around the web, and I quite liked the focus and the just knowing exactly how something would turn out with print design. But then I'd do that for a little bit and then get really frustrated that I couldn't change stuff or update it. So then I would kind of go back to web design. And I think I still feel that way. I kind of like, I have to do a little something for a while, and then once the constraints of that medium become too challenging, then it's time to swap to something else.
Well, what is something else now? What's going to be coming next? Paintings?
I don't know. I did do paint. You know, I did painting before. It wasn't good. So.
Well, the same could be said about your music, given your experience with Massive Attack.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah, but it must have been much better now. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to host you.
Thank you, Vitaly. Thanks, everyone.